Integrative Inquiry, Week 9 Practice, Difficult Conversations.
So I invite you to bring a gentle attention to your body in the chair, noticing the feet on the floor, seat in the chair, the back upright, alert, yet relaxed. Noticing where your hands are placed. And then inviting the eyes to soften. So it's as if you're looking but not really seeing. Or you can even invite the eyes to close. And once you've inclined a sense of self, of the body in this space and time, inviting your attention to rest on the breath sensation in the belly. Perhaps noticing the gentle sensation of the inhale and the exhale. And as you notice the breath sensation in the body, you may also notice mind wandering to sound sensations, to other bodily sensations, or to thought sensations, past, future. And seeing if you can bring a gentle awareness to whatever you're noticing, naming it with one word. And then kindly inviting your attention to rest back on the breath sensation in the belly. Reminding yourself that you can always return to this place of space and time with attention resting on body sensation, the attention resting on the breath sensation in the body. I'll invite in a memory, a mild memory of a mild, difficult conversation from this week. Noticing how the brain goes to probably the most difficult conversation, and that would be the negative bias of the brain in action. So inviting a noting of where the mind wandered and seeing if you can pick out just a mildly difficult conversation, or perhaps an experience that is inviting you into a difficult conversation. And as you recall this experience of a mild, difficult conversation, or an experience that is inviting you into a difficult conversation, see if you can discover what is here right now as physiological sensation in the body with the practice of inviting in this memory. What are you noticing in the body? Where are you noticing these sensations in the body? Do the sensations have a particular quality, characteristic, a texture, an intensity? And in loving kindness, what else are you noticing? Are you noticing particular emotions or feelings, thoughts, images? Are you recalling other sensations such as sense, sensation, smell, sight, or sound? And reminding yourself that these are physiological sensations as you recall the memory of the difficult conversation or the experience that invites in a difficult conversation. And as you recall this experience of a difficult conversation or an experience that's calling you to a difficult conversation, what are you noticing about the content of the experience? The words that were said by you. As you recall these words that were said, what are you noticing about the feeling tone or emotions physiologically sensed in the body? And as you consider the content of the conversation, the words that were said, and you consider the feelings or the emotions that you sensed, what are you noticing was at stake for you in this conversation? Perhaps it might be helpful to think of this as, what were you hoping to get out of the conversation? Or was there an identity that was moving to front and center stage for you? Be something like a desire to show competency or to have your goodness seen. Maybe what was moving to front and center was your desire to be seen as a person worthy of love and respect. And whatever you are noticing, see if you can name that with one word without going into the story of whether it should be there. See if you can name it with one word without attaching to the judgment of the experience. And then whatever you're noticing, see if you can engage in a validation of what you're noticing. This experience is real for you. Maybe connect with common humanity. Who else might be feeling this experience or would be feeling this experience had they just experienced what you experienced? And then naming the lingering pain or suffering that still may be present as you recall this experience. Giving yourself permission to offer yourself a soothing touch, perhaps a hand to the face, the shoulder, the heart space. And then what soothing words would you like to hear in this moment? And what do you need? Now the invitation is to release this memory of this experience of a difficult conversation or an experience that's inviting in a difficult conversation. Perhaps bringing your hand to your belly or continuing with your soothing touch. See if you can become aware of the body breathing. Gentle inhale and exhale. And then see if you can bring your attention to the sound of this bell. Thank you. The invitation now is to open your eyes and either journal on what you noticed in your private notebook, or you're welcome to open your chat window. Again, the conversation bubble, just click on that and open it. If you can't find it, feel free to use your computer cursor and scroll it around until you find it and then click on that. Feel free to share what you noticed as we practice that guided meditation practice. What did you notice? Did any of you have difficulty coming up with a difficult conversation experience? Welcome to raise your electronic hand. Anybody have difficulty? Okay, so was it easy? How many of you had no problem finding a difficult conversation from your week or an experience that, yeah, I hear you. Yes, yes. Thank you. Feel for you all. Yes. It's an experience that we have often in leadership roles. There's often plenty of opportunities for us to engage in difficult conversations or experiences that are calling our attention towards difficult conversations. So as we practice this practice, what did you notice? What's alive for you? Were you able to notice physiological sensations just in the recalling of the memory? How many of you noticed that? Yeah. Were you able to notice thoughts or naming of feelings and emotions as you recalled this difficult conversation or experience? How many of you noticed that? Yeah, thank you. And how many of you were able to go back to the content that was actually what you said or perhaps what the other person said? How many of you were able to notice that? Yeah, content, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And how many of you noticed the feelings or emotions that were present? Yeah. Yeah, lots of you. Thank you. Yeah, lots of you. Thank you. And how about the question of what was at stake for you? How many of you noticed what was at stake for you, or the identity that was at stake for you? Yeah, sort of the what's underneath that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And again, feel free to use the chat window at any time you'd like to offer a thought, an idea, or question or comment. Appreciate your engaging in this. This makes it much more fun. So the practice that we practiced is taken out of the book Stone, Patton, and Heen's Difficult Conversations book. And it's not a new book by any means, but what I really enjoy about this book is it integrates the mindfulness practice, the noticing what we're noticing, and a self-regulation, the stop, breathe, notice, reflect, and respond. And the compassion practice, both for self and the possibility for others, to ensure and to select a choice of how we would like to respond. And in this book, you can also get it on audio if you're interested. The idea is that they're talking about 3 levels of any conversation. So any conversation that we're having, any conversation, particularly difficult ones, or ones that we would call difficult. There's the content, and this is what we practiced last week. The what I heard you say is, or what I hear this means for me is conversation, the content conversation. Then there's that feeling part. The what I heard you feeling is, or what I notice I'm feeling is. So the feelings are the emotional part of the conversation. So there's the content, what's being said. There's the emotions, the feelings, what's being physiologically expressed. And then this third part is an identity piece. And Stone, Patton, and Heen talk about it as what's at stake in this conversation. I also like to think about this, and they suggest that we think about this in terms of identity. What's underneath? Like, what am I identifying with that I want to have seen in this conversation? And it could be that I'm competent. It could be that I'm a good person. It could be that I'm enough. It could be that I'm worthy of love and respect. So the invitation here is, as we think about the difficult conversations that we've had, where are we noticing content? Where are we noticing emotions and feelings? And where are we noticing that identity piece? What's central to my identity? And it could be I want to be seen as the authority figure, or I don't want to be seen as disrespectful. I don't want to be seen as insubordinate, whatever it could be. Or I want my ethnicity or race to be seen, or my gender identity to be seen here in this conversation. What's at stake? And in this practice of mindful compassion, our invitation is, again, using the breath to ground us, or using that background of noticing the body anchored in this moment, the breath sensation in the body, inviting in an inquiry into these 3 parts of the conversation. So one way we'll do this is not advance all the slides at the same time. But what I'd invite you to do is this practice. If you are in a room where you are with a colleague and you're sitting next to a colleague listening to this, you can practice with a colleague. If not, if you're by yourself, the invitation would be to pull out your pen and paper, or your pencil and paper, and journal. So how many of you are sitting with a colleague right now and you'd like to practice this? Anybody? Okay, most of the case we're not sitting with colleagues as we engage in these videos. So let's invite then journaling. And as we journal, you can also think about, once we finish this webinar, engaging in a conversation with a trusted colleague or family member. So how many of you, again, do not have, anybody does not have a difficult conversation that took place this week or last week, or an experience that is inviting in a difficult conversation? Anybody not have that? See, you're in great company. We're all experiencing this. Common humanity. So as what I'd like for you to do is we're going to move through these 3 levels of a conversation. And first we'll begin from your viewpoint. And so these may have been what came to mind when we were practicing this in the guided meditation. So just taking a couple of minutes, I invite you to journal on what happened. What were the actual words that you heard you say and that you heard the other person say? So what did you hear you say? What did you hear the other person say? How did you feel? So this is all from your perspective. How did you feel? And what was at stake for you? So please go ahead. I'll set a timer and I'll ring the bell in just a moment. So please go ahead and set a journal for a couple of minutes on what you noticed here. Please begin. Just journaling whatever comes to mind. What happened? What was the content? How did you feel? And what was at stake for you? Again, you're just writing whatever is coming to mind as you consider these questions. Taking a few moments to wrap up your conversation with yourself. Okay, inviting yourself to close the conversation on this perspective. Inviting attention into the body. Noticing your breath and the quality of your breath sensation. Now let's switch gears. What are the perspectives? What might be the perspectives of the other party's point of view? So here we're inviting in a bit of storytelling. We're also inviting in a bit of looking again. So when you think of the other person's point of view, what happened from their perspective? How do you think they felt? What might have been at stake for them? So inviting in, again, a journaling. So please begin just writing, what do you think was at stake for the other person? What happened from their perspective? How do you think they felt? What might have been at stake for them? What were their identities that were involved? And just continuing to write whatever's coming to mind. Might notice storytelling. You might notice looking again. What's really here? What's really here? And taking a moment to wrap up your conversation with yourself about the other person's perspective. Then inviting in a grounding, noticing the body in the chair, the breath sensation in the body. And returning to your journaling one more time. If a wise person, a very wise person, came in to observe this experience that you've been journaling about, or witnessed the difficult conversation you've been journaling about, what might be the third person or the wise person's perspective? So now taking it from the wise person's perspective, what do you think that person might have thought the content of the experience is about? Feel free to journal on what comes to mind. So what do you think the third person, that wise person who came to observe the experience that you had or witnessed the difficult conversation, what do you think they felt was at stake for you? What was the content? What would they have heard? What would they have seen with regard to feelings? And what would they have thought was at stake in the conversation? Taking a moment to just journal on whatever comes to mind from the third person's perspective. Just continuing again to write whatever's coming to mind. And taking a moment to wrap up whatever you're noticing as you think about this third person's conversation. And noticing the breath sensation in the body. Noticing the body in the chair. Taking a moment to share out now, what are you noticing as you practice this 3 levels or 3 parts of the conversation? Your perspective, the other person's perspective, and a wise third person's perspective. What are you noticing? Feel free to use the chat window if you'd like. Or you can even continue to journal privately with yourself. It's up to you. What are you noticing? And while you're writing, I'll share a little bit about what I notice when I practice this. When I practice this, either in reflection after a difficult conversation that I didn't feel went well, Or after a difficult experience for which I'm thinking about inviting someone into a difficult experience, a difficult conversation, or right in the midst of a difficult conversation. When I notice this, it really helps me, again, practice on the spot the SBNRR, the self-compassion, and the compassion practices. So right in the midst of the conversation that I'm having, I'll notice, ooh, trigger, ooh, I feel disrespected. Ooh, that person feels disrespected. Ooh, so, and it's not necessarily, depending on the relationship that I have with the person, or the depth of the relationship, the quality of the relationship, I may not name what I'm noticing. If I have a really close relationship, I'll name what I'm noticing. I'm noticing I feel disrespected. Ooh, I'm noticing that I think you feel disrespected. But if I don't have that close relationship, I'll just try to note it and then perhaps speak to it in another way. Maybe even with those powerful what questions. So what did you notice when this happened? What were you feeling? What were you sensing? What I was feeling was this. Yeah. What I was noticing was this. What took front stage for me was this. Yeah. So I'm keeping it, I guess I would say, a little bit more distant, in the sense that I'm not really going to that raw, ooh, I notice I'm feeling really disrespected. Like I'm not disrespected. I'm not going to that if it's more of a professional conversation in a professional context. So what did you notice? Feel free to share in that window. What are you noticing? What did you notice when you thought about these three parts of the conversation? Are you noticing that what's at stake for you is fueling your emotions? Is anybody noticing that? Like I want to show them I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, I'm competent enough. Are any of you noticing that? Show of hands. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I notice that a lot. I'm like, whoa, my emotions are here, that I want them to see that I know what I'm doing. I want them to see that I'm not a bad person. I want them to see that I can do this, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. When you notice the difficult conversation, how many of you are noticing that what's at stake for the other person might be driving the conversation? What you think is at stake for the other person? Yeah. 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 And what's possible in all of this? When we begin to notice what's at stake for us and what's at stake for the other person, what do you think is possible from that? Is access to compassion practices possible? Yes, yes. Access to compassion practices, right? Thank you. Yeah, it could be fierce compassion, right? Or remembering that compassion has all sorts of definitions. It could be fierce compassion, or it could be the softer compassion, the softer side of compassion. Yeah. Thank you. So as we move forward, again, you're welcome to practice this. What you can do is you can practice this from person A, your perspective, the other person's perspective. And then you can have whoever's listening to you talk about what they heard was your perspective and what they heard was the other person's perspective. It's almost like having that third person voice. But if you're journaling and you don't want to share with somebody whatever you're experiencing, you can journal just as we did, your perspective, the other party's perspective, and then think of that as a third person perspective. Okay. And what comes out in the third person is if you're practicing with another person, you're speaking first, then they're telling you what they hear and what they think the other person's, and then you're talking about how that went, like what you were missing. And so then you might get more to that third person part of the story, that objective wise person who may not be emotionally invested or who may not have identity invested in the conversation. Does that make sense? Just checking in. Okay, thanks. So as we move forward, the invitation here is to think about any experience that you've had where you might need to invite in a difficult conversation, or a difficult conversation that you had that you want to learn from, so that you can practice becoming more skillful. And skillful meaning embodying more mindful compassion practices in the midst of a difficult conversation. And so part of this would be verbalizing the 3 levels, the content, feelings, identity that we just spoke about. And then I love this piece. It's checking your intention and deciding whether to raise the issue. So this is very important. If I've had a icky experience and I'm trying to think about whether or not I want to invite in another person into a difficult conversation. And what's helpful for me here is to check my intention. Stone, Patton, and Heen say that difficult conversations are primarily used for problem solving. They're not for you convincing the other person that you're right, or for you convincing the other person that you're wrong. They're really to reach an understanding of what happened and then a problem solving to move to the future. Okay? The difficult conversation process is intended to reach understanding of what happened and problem solving for how to move into the future. So if my intention to have an argument is so I can show that I'm right, so that I can prove whatever, that's not a difficult conversation. My intention is to be right. I'm not seeking understanding. Therefore, the difficult conversation process won't really happen. I won't ever see the other person's perspective. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. So in this process, it's very helpful to start from the third story. What would that objective wise person think if they were coming into what you just experienced? And as we just practice, sometimes it's difficult to get to the third, the wise person story, the third objective story, until I actually journal my experience and I journal what the other person might be experiencing, and then think about, oh, having done that, what's that wise perspective? And in there, I'm allowing the opportunity to explore their story of what happened and my story of what happened. And in exploring the stories of what happened, remembering that the brain is not dependable when it comes to memory, especially when emotions are involved. Right? And the brain is also a storytelling machine. I might have made up a whole bunch of stuff that was just not there. Right? I may have made up a whole bunch of stuff that just wasn't there. And so in all of this, then, once I really name stories, name what I understand, and if I can do that in partnership with someone, so that in this activity, the person that you want to have a difficult conversation could be person B in this exercise. You could rehearse it with a person B in this exercise, person B being this person, right? Or you could actually engage in this difficult conversation with the person B so that you can move to problem solving. The other part of this is that Stone, Patton, and Heen remind us that impact is not intention. So some people view this as, it doesn't matter what your intention was, we have to deal with the impact. What Stone, Patton, and Heen are inviting us into is be mindful of my intention and the other person's intention in the dialogue. And while, for example, my intention may not be to emotionally harm you, that may be the impact of the experience that we had. And so we can bring in impact, but we also want to honor and respect that it wasn't the intention. And this keeps us out of victimization. It keeps us out of deep storytelling, and it doesn't reinforce the negative bias of the brain. The other part that was really helpful in this practice that became really alive to me is that there's always identity issues, whether one is aware of them or not. Sometimes they're intersecting of identities and they're, popping up like this, but there are always identity issues. And again, practicing when I notice mine that come up, just practicing noticing, stop, breathe, notice, reflect. Is this true? Who would I be how would I behave if I didn't think it was true? Who would I be? How would I behave? What would I choose if I thought it was true? Right? So is this attack on gender? Is this an attack on race? Is this an attack? And it may be, and they may be intentional, but who would I choose to be if I didn't think that it was? Who would I choose to be if I did think it was? What would I choose and how would I approach problem solving? Right? We get to choose. Is that fun? All right, thoughts, questions, ideas. What's alive for you? It's a lot, I recognize. Just waiting for you to share if you'd like to. Right. So also in this difficult conversations dialogue, I like to bring in Brene Brown's engaged feedback checklist. And this is also loaded on your website, should be loaded on your website. Let me know if it's not. And one moment, I just lost my chat window, so I can't see if you have any questions, so I'm pulling that back up. But the engaged feedback checklist, it's from her book, Dare to Lead. I love this because sometimes I think I'm ready for a difficult conversation. Like I've done these steps, and I think I'm ready. But then when I pull up Brene Brown's Daring Feedback, which can be used in the difficult conversation, I realize I'm not ready to sit next to that person. I am not ready to sit with them in loving kindness and compassion to have this conversation. And then I also might still be holding on to the problem, right? The problem is, and we'll work more in this course later about what's to be gained from holding on, what is to be gained from holding on to the problem and keeping it between the two of us, or the more of us. Is there's always something to be gained and lost from that, and how aware am I of that? So how am I willing, how much, to what extent am I willing to put the problem in front of us rather than between us? And then I'm, am I ready to listen, to ask questions, and to accept that I may not fully understand the issue? Am I ready to acknowledge what the other person does well instead of picking apart their mistakes? Am I ready to recognize their strengths and how they can use them to address the challenges? And I can hold them accountable without shaming or blaming, or without demeaning. Without shaming or blaming or demeaning, can I hold them accountable with that? And keep in mind that this was part of my difficult conversation I had yesterday, where what I was holding another accountable for behavior, and I was intentionally doing so without shaming or blaming. But the other person still felt demeaned because the behavior was something that the person is trying, it's a pattern the person is trying to break. So we had to get into quite a few conversations, right, before we could reach, oh, I understand why you feel that way. Can you be with us in a way where you can trust that you're not being demeaned, but that that you may be the one doing the self-shaming, not me shaming you. That makes sense. So owning our own parts in it, and genuinely thanking someone for their efforts rather than criticizing them for their failings, and talking about how to resolve the challenges will lead to growth and opportunity, and strengthen the working relationships or personal relationships. And then model the vulnerability and openness that I expect to see from you. And this can be a bit tricky, particularly as I'm noticing my whatever identity might be at stake for me. If it's the not enough being triggered, if it's the oh, because I'm a female, you don't think I can do, you know, that thing. So noticing that. So it can be a bit tricky. And so just, again, inviting in the compassion practices as you engage in this. But I found that checklist really helpful to thinking about my willingness, also the readiness emotionally to engage in a difficult conversation. All right, so checking in. Feel free to work with the Brene Brown documents and see what's useful with whom and what context, yeah, as well as the difficult conversation practice. So how can I be of service? What are you noticing? What's alive for you? Any questions or comments? Thoughts, ideas, affirmations of what you're already practicing. We are a quiet bunch today, aren't we? This happened in my morning class too. I'm like, everyone's tired. All right. I don't want to torture you. So I will thank you. Okay, here's where Martha. Thank you, Martha. So good to see you. Noticing that I'm surprised when I have a moment of noticing and reflecting, and then what comes next? Yes. Ari, thank you. Very helpful. I can see how I get caught in my own perspective. Oh, thank you, Ari. Yeah, so insightful. I hear a lot of wisdom. I am with you in that. Aja, I've noticed that I am not too anxious about engaging with people when we are in conflict. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so it's empowering. And that's what these practices are intended to be. They're intended to be empowering. Yeah, no, it's okay. Take care of yourself, Aja. And Martha, you're remembering that the next moment, I'm smack in the middle of the moment. Yeah, I love it. Lots of wisdom. Yes, the next moment, we're smack in the middle of the moment. Next moment, new moment, new opportunity for a new choice that we can be smack in the middle of. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, you can notice that you're in, yeah, right. When we forget to practice, we can then notice, which is still noticing, right? We can notice that we're stuck in the emotional moment. And then we can begin to practice again. All over. Yeah. And I noticed a lot of that yesterday in my difficult conversation, right? Just, ooh, there I am stuck in emotion. And then new moment, new choice, new opportunity for new choice. So it can be just really fast. Yes. Our noticing. So inspiring. Yeah. So inspiring. All right. So such a joy and such an honor for me to be with you every week. Thank you for joining in this journey with me. Next week, we get to talk about trauma-informed practices. We'll be shifting our typical time and date a little bit because I'll be traveling, so I need to shift our usual gathering time. But the webinars, as always, are recorded. So if we've moved to a time, and I know this next time that we move to will probably not be very kind to your schedule, although this isn't very kind either, but it'll probably be even worse kind to your time zone. So the recording is always available if you're not able to join live, although I love having you live. And Aja has a notice also. I also have a meditation with some students, and I started it off with a breathing exercise that were all started from a clear space, and it worked. Yay! All right. It's powerful, isn't it? And I love this stuff because it's free. Each human carries it within us, and oftentimes we just need to give ourselves permission to practice and give each other permission to practice. Let's give ourselves permission to practice, give each other permission to practice. And holding the space for our students and our colleagues to practice can be one of the most powerful gifts we give ourselves and to them. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom and insight. Such a joy. All right, beautiful friends and colleagues, until I see you next time, please be well, be happy, and be. Take good care.